Rocket-propelled grenade. A rocket-propelled grenade, often abbreviated RPG, is a shoulder-fired missile weapon. Most RPG can be carried by an individual soldier and are frequently used as anti-tank weapons. These warheads are affixed to a rocket motor which propels the RPG towards the target, and they are stabilized in flight with fins. Some types of RPG are reloadable with new rocket-propelled grenades, while others are single-use. RPG are generally loaded from the front. RPG with high explosive anti-tank heat warheads are very effective against lightly armored vehicles such as armored personnel carriers (APC) and armored cars. However, modern, heavily armored vehicles, such as upgraded APC and main battle tanks, are generally too well protected with thick composite or reactive armor to be penetrated by an RPG, unless less armored sections of the vehicle are exploited. Various warheads are also capable of causing secondary damage to vulnerable systems, especially sights, tracks, rear and roof of turrets, and other unarmored targets. The term rocket-propelled grenade is a backronym. It stems from the Russian language RPG, which stands for Ruchnoy Protovatankovy Granatomiat, transliterated as Ruchnoy Protovatankovy Granatomiat, which has the initials RPG, meaning handheld anti-tank grenade launcher, the name given to early Russian designs. History. Predecessor weapons. The static nature of trench warfare in World War I encouraged the use of shielded defenses, even including personal armor, that were impenetrable by standard rifle ammunition. This led to some isolated experiments with higher caliber rifles, similar to elephant guns using armor-piercing ammunition. The very first tanks, the British Mark I, could be penetrated by these weapons under the right conditions. Mark Roman IV tanks, however, had slightly thicker armor. In response, the German rushed to create an upgraded version of these early anti-armor rifles, the Tanktuer M1918, the first anti-tank rifle. In the interwar years, tank armor continued to increase overall, to the point that anti-tank rifles could no longer be effective against anything but light tanks. Any rifle made powerful enough for heavier tanks would exceed the ability of a soldier to carry and fire the weapon. Even with the first tanks, artillery officers often used field guns depressed to fire directly at armored targets. However, this practice expended much valuable ammunition and was of increasingly limited effectiveness as tank armor became thicker. This led to the concept of anti-tank guns, a form of artillery specifically designed to destroy armored fighting vehicles, normally from static defensive positions, that is, immobile during a battle. The first dedicated anti-tank artillery began appearing in the 1920s, and by World War II was a common appearance in most armies. In order to penetrate armor, they fired specialized ammunition from proportionally longer barrels to achieve a higher muzzle velocity than field guns. Most anti-tank guns were developed in the 1930s as improvements in tanks were noted, and nearly every major arms manufacturer produced one type or another. Anti-tank guns deployed during World War II were manned by specialist infantry rather than artillery crews, and issued to infantry units accordingly. The anti-tank guns of the 1930s were of small caliber. Nearly all major armies possessing them used .37 ammunition, except for the British Army, which had developed the Fortum Ordnance QF 2-pounder. As World War II progressed, the appearance of heavier tanks rendered these weapons obsolete, and anti-tank guns likewise began firing larger caliber and more effective armor-piercing shells. Although a number of large-caliber guns were developed during the war that were capable of knocking out the most heavily armored tanks, they proved slow to set up and difficult to conceal. The latter generation of low-recoil anti-tank weapons, which allowed projectiles the size of an artillery shell to be fired from a man's shoulder, was considered a far more viable option for arming infantrymen. First shaped charge, portable weapons. The RPG has its roots in the 20th century with the early development of the explosive shaped charge, in which the explosive is made with a conical hollow, which concentrates its power on the impact point. Before the adoption of the shaped charge, anti-tank guns and tank guns relied primarily on kinetic energy of metal shells to defeat armor. Soldier-carried anti-tank rifles, such as the Boy's anti-tank rifle, could be used against lightly armored tankettes and light armored vehicles. However, as tank armor increased in thickness and effectiveness, the anti-tank guns needed to defeat them became increasingly heavy, cumbersome, and expensive. During Roman II, as tank armor got thicker, larger caliber anti-tank guns were developed to defeat this thicker armor. While larger anti-tank guns were more effective, the weight of these anti-tank guns meant that they increasingly were mounted on wheeled, towed platforms. This meant that if the infantry was on foot, they might not have access to these wheeled, vehicle-towed anti-tank guns. This led to situations where infantry could find themselves defenseless against tanks and unable to attack tanks. Armies found that they needed to give infantry a human portable, i.e., can be carried by one soldier weapon to defeat enemy armor when no wheeled anti-tank guns were available, since anti-tank rifles were no longer effective. Initial attempts to put such weapons in the hands of the infantry resulted in weapons like the Soviet RPG-min 40 blast effect hand grenade, where RPG stood for Ruchная protobattankovaya granata, meaning handheld anti-tank grenade. The later RPG-43 and RPG-6 used shaped charges, the chemical energy of their explosive being used more efficiently to enable the defeat of thicker armor. However, being hand-thrown weapons, they still had to be deployed at suicidally close range to be effective. What was needed was a means of delivering the shaped charge warhead from a distance. Different approaches to this goal would lead to the anti-tank spigot mortar, the recoilless rifle, and, from the development of practical rocketry, the rocket-propelled grenade. Research occasioned by World War II produced such weapons as the American bazooka and German Panzerfaust, which combined portability with effectiveness against armored vehicles such as tanks. The Soviet-developed RPG-7 is the most widely distributed, recognizable, and used RPG in the world. The basic design of this RPG was developed by the Soviets shortly after World War II in the form of the RPG-2, which is similar in function to the bazooka due to the reloadability, and the Panzerfaust due to an oversized grenade that protrudes outside of a smaller launch tube and the recoilless launch, though the rounds it fires lack a form of propulsion in addition to the launch charge. Soviet RPG were used extensively during the Vietnam War by the Vietnam People's Army and Viet Cong, as well as during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan by the Mujahideen and against South Africans in Angola and Namibia, formerly Southwest Africa, by SWAPO guerrillas during what the South Africans called the South African War. In the 2000s, they were still being used widely in conflict areas such as Chechnya, Iraq, and Sri Lanka. Militants have also used RPG against helicopters. Taliban fighters shot down U.S. CH-47 Chinook helicopters in June 2005 and August 2011, and Somali militiamen shot down 2 U.S. UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters during the Battle of Mogadishu in 1993. Design. The RPG warhead being used against tanks and other armor often has a shaped charge explosive warhead. A shaped charge is an explosive charge shaped to focus the effect of the explosive's energy. Various types are used to penetrate tank armor. Typical modern line-shaped charge can penetrate steel armor to a depth of 7 or more times the diameter of the charge diameters, CD, though greater depths of 10 CD and above have been achieved. Despite the popular misconception that shaped charges melt tank armor, the shaped charge does not depend in any way on heating or melting for its effectiveness. That is, the superplastic metal jet from a shaped charge impact on armor forms mainly due to a sudden and intense mechanical stress and does not melt its way through armor, as its effect is purely due to. An RPG comprises 2 main parts, the launcher and a rocket equipped with a warhead. The most common types of warheads are high-explosive HE and high-explosive anti-tank heat rounds. HE rounds can be used against troops or unarmored structures or vehicles. Heat rounds can be used against armored vehicles. These warheads are affixed to a rocket motor and stabilized in flight with fins. Some types of RPG are single-use disposable units, such as the RPG-22 and M72 LAW. With these units, once the rocket is fired, the entire launcher is disposed of. Others are reloadable, such as the Soviet RPG-7 and the Israeli B-300. With reloadable RPG, a new rocket can be inserted into the muzzle of the weapon after firing. The launcher is designed so that the rocket exits the launcher without discharging an exhaust that would be dangerous to the operator, an issue that tended to affect the earliest RPG weapon systems such as the German Panzers, which featured a metal shield for the operator attached to the launch tube. In the case of the RPG-7, the rocket is launched by a gunpowder booster charge, and the rocket motor ignites only after 10 meters. In some other designs, the propellant charge burns completely within the tube. An RPG is an inexpensive way of delivering an explosive payload or warhead over a distance with moderate accuracy. Substantially more expensive guided anti-tank missiles are used at larger distances or when accuracy is paramount. Some anti-tank missiles, such as the Malyutka, can be guided after firing by the operator. An RPG is not normally guided towards the target by heat sensors or IR signatures. Nor can most RPG rockets be controlled in flight after being aimed and launched. While the lack of active targeting technologies or after firing guidance input can be viewed as a challenge or weak point, it also makes it hard. For example, if a soldier or other fighter launches an RPG at a hovering helicopter, even if the helicopter releases chaff flares, engages in signal jamming, or releases radar fooling foil, this will have no effect on a typical RPG warhead in flight, even if these measures might protect against more sophisticated surface-to-air missiles. Warheads. The heat-high explosive anti-tank round is a standard-shaped charge warhead, similar in concept to those used in many tank cannon rounds. In this type of warhead, the shape of the explosive material within the warhead focuses the explosive energy on a copper or similar metal lining. This heats the metal lining and propels some of it forward at a very high velocity in a highly plastic state. The resulting narrow jet of metal can defeat armor equivalent to several hundred millimeters of RHA, such as that used in light and medium armored vehicles. However, heavily armored vehicles, such as main battle tanks, are generally too well armored to be penetrated by an RPG unless weaker sections of the armor are exploited. Various warheads are also capable of causing secondary damage to vulnerable systems, especially sights, tracks, rear and roof of turrets, and other soft targets. The warhead detonates on impact or when the fuse runs out. Usually the fuse is set to the maximum burn of the rocket motor, but it can be shortened for improvised anti-aircraft purposes. Specialized warheads are available for illumination, smoke, tear gas, and white phosphorus. Russia, China, and many former Warsaw Pact nations have also developed a fuel-air explosive thermobaric warhead. Another recent development is a tandem heat warhead capable of penetrating reactive armor. So-called Prigs-propelled recoilless improvised grenade were improvised warheads used by the Provisional IRA. Effectiveness. The RPG-29 uses a tandem charge high-explosive anti-tank warhead to penetrate explosive reactive armor ERA as well as composite armor behind it. It is capable of penetrating MBT, such as the Mohn Abrams, older model Mark Roman II version of the Merkava, Challenger 2 and T-90. In August 2006, in Al-Amara, in Iraq, a Soviet RPG-29 damaged the front underside of a Challenger 2 tank, detonating ERA in the area of the driver's cabin. The driver lost part of a foot and two more of the crew were injured, but the driver was able to reverse 2.4 km 1.5 mi to an aid post. The incident was not made public until May 2007. In response to accusations, the MOD said, "We have never claimed that the Challenger 2 is impenetrable." Since then, the ERA has been replaced with a Dorchester block and the steel underbelly lined with armor as part of the Street Fighter upgrade, which was a direct response to this incident. In May 2008, the New York Times disclosed that an American Moan tank had also been damaged by an RPG-29 in Iraq. The American Army is ranking the RPG-29 threat to American armor as high. They have refused to allow the newly formed Iraqi army to buy it, fearing that it would fall into the hands of insurgents. Various armies and manufacturers have developed add-on tank armor and other systems for urban combat, such as the Tank Urban Survival Kit Tusk for Moan Abrams, Slat Armor for the Stryker, ERA Kit for the FV432, Azure for Leclerc, and others. Similar solutions are Active Protection Systems APS engaging and destroying closing projectiles, such as the Russian Drazden Arena, as well as the recent Israeli Trophy Active Protection System. The RPG-30 was designed to address the threat of active protection systems on tanks by using a false target to trick the APS. The RPG-30 shares a close resemblance with the RPG-27 in that it is a man-portable, disposable anti-tank rocket launcher with a single-shot capacity. However, unlike the RPG-27, there is a smaller diameter precursor round in a smaller side barrel tube in addition to the main round in the main tube. This precursor round acts as a false target, tricking the target's active protection system into engaging it, allowing the main round a clear path into the target, while the APS is stuck in the 0.2-0.4 second delay it needs to start its next engagement. Recent German systems were able to reduce reaction delay to mere milliseconds, cancelling this advantage. The PG-30 is the main round of the RPG-30. The round is a 105 mm tandem-shaped charge with a weight of 10.3 kg 22.7 lb and has a range of 200 meters and a stated penetration capability in excess of 600. 1500 mm reinforced concrete, 2000 mm brick and 3700 mm of soil. Reactive armor, including explosive reactive armor ERA, can be defeated with multiple hits into the same place, such as by tandem charge weapons, which fire 2 or more shaped charges in rapid succession. Protection. An early method of disabling shaped charges developed during World War II was to apply thin skirt armor or mesh wire at a distance around the hull and turret of the tank. The skirt or mesh armor cage armor triggers the RPG on contact, and much of the energy that a shaped charge produces dissipates before coming into contact with the main armor of the vehicle. Well-sloped armor also gives some protection because the shaped charge is forced to penetrate a greater amount of armor due to the oblique angle. The benefits of cage armor are still considered great in modern battlefields in the Middle East, and although similar effects can be obtained using spaced armor, either as a part of the original design or as applique armor fitted later, cage armor is preferable due to its low weight and ease of repair. Today, technologically advanced armies have implemented composite armors such as Chobham armor, which provide superior protection to steel. For added protection, vehicles may be retrofitted with reactive armor. On impact, reactive tiles explode or deform, disrupting the normal function of the shaped charge. Russian and Israeli vehicles also use active protection systems such as Drazden Arena APS or Trophy. Such a system detects and shoots down incoming projectiles before they reach the vehicle. As in all arms races, these developments in armor countermeasures have led to the development of RPG rounds designed specifically to defeat them, with methods such as a tandem charge warhead, which has 2 shaped charges, of which the first is meant to activate any reactive armor, and the second to penetrate the vehicle. Weapons by country. United States. The United States Army developed a lightweight anti-tank weapon, LAW, in the middle 1950s. By 1961, the M72 LAW was in use. It is a shoulder-fired, disposable rocket launcher with heat warhead. It is a recoilless weapon, which is easy to use, and effective against armored vehicles. It was used during the Vietnam War and is still in use today. It uses a fin-stabilized rocket. In response to the threat of thicker armor, this weapon was replaced by the AT-4 recoilless rifle, a larger and non-collapsible, albeit still single-shot weapon. The United States Army and Marine Corps also use a different launcher, which is reloadable. The M3 multi-role anti-armor anti-tank weapon system MAWS derived from the 84 Carl Gustav. Unlike the RPG, they are both reloaded from the breech end rather than the muzzle. Bazooka, M72, LAW. M3 multi-role anti-armor anti-tank weapon system MAWS. MK-153 shoulder-launched multipurpose assault weapon small. MO-141 bunker defeat munition. PSRL-1. Soviet Union and Russian Federation. Specific types of RPG current, past and under development include anti-personnel explosives, RPG-7, reloadable RPG launcher, TBG-7V thermobaric rocket, and OG-7V fragmentation grenade, RPG-27 Tavolga, one-shot disposable RPG launcher, RSHG-1 thermobaric rockets, RSHG-1, RSHG-2, RPG-29 Vampire, reloadable RPG launcher, TBG-29 thermobaric rockets, RPO Rise, RPO ASH-MIL, MGK Burr, RPO M, MRO Arrow anti-tank explosives, RPG-1, RPG-2, RPG-7, reloadable RPG launcher, PG-7VL with 500 RHA penetration, PG-7VR with 600 RHA penetration after ERA, RPG-16, reloadable RPG launcher, PG-16 with 300 RHA penetration, higher accuracy and 4 times the range of the RPG-7, RPG-18 Muha Fly, one-shot disposable RPG launcher, PG-18 with 375 RHA penetration, RPG-22 Netto Net, one-shot disposable RPG launcher, PG-22 with 400 RHA penetration, RPG-26 Aglen, one-shot disposable RPG launcher, PG-26 with 500 RHA penetration, RPG-27 Tavolga, one-shot disposable RPG launcher, PG-27 with 750 RHA penetration after ERA, RPG-28 Kliukvo, one-shot disposable RPG launcher, with 1000 RHA penetration after ERA. RPG-29 Vampire, reloadable RPG launcher, PG-29V with 750 RHA penetration after ERA. RPG-31 shot disposable RPG launcher, with a precursor forerunner additional submunition intended to defeat active defense systems like Trophy. 650 RHA penetration after active protection. RPG-32 Barco's, latest variant of RPG 105 caliber, PG-32V with 650 RHA penetration, bunker buster, RM, France, LRAC phone, Germany, Raketen Panzerbutch Panzerschreck, Panzerfaust, Panzerfaust II, Panzerfaust III, Israel, V-300 small, IMI Chopin, Matador, Sweden, AT-4, Spain, C-90CR M3, Czechoslovakia, RPG-75, Poland, RPG-76 Commer, North Macedonia, M90 Seljan, Yugoslavia, M79 Osa, Mati Zolja, China, Type 69 RPG, PF-89, Palestine, Albania, Batter, Yasin, Ukraine, Arcaminus 4 in Gaul, United Kingdom, Piat. Tactics. One of the first instances the weapon was used by militants was on 13 January 1975 at Orly Airport in France, when Carlos the Jackal, together with another member from the PFLP, used two Soviet RPG-7 grenades to attack an Israeli El Al airliner. Both missed the target, with one hitting a Yugoslav Airlines' DC-9 instead. In Afghanistan, Mujahideen guerrillas used RPG-7s to destroy Soviet vehicles. To assure a kill, 2 to 4 RPG shooters would be assigned to each vehicle. Each armored vehicle hunter-killer team can have as many as 15 RPG. In areas where vehicles were confined to a single path, a mountain road, swamps, snow, urban areas, RPG teams trapped convoys by destroying the first and last vehicles in line, preventing movement of the other vehicles. This tactic was especially effective in cities. Convoys learned to avoid approaches with overhangs and to send infantrymen forward in hazardous areas to detect the RPG teams. Multiple shooters were also effective against heavy tanks with reactive armor. The first shot would be against the driver's viewing prisms. Following shots would be in pairs, one to set off the reactive armor, the second to penetrate the tank's armor. Favored weak spots were the top and rear of the turret. Afghans sometimes used RPG-7s at extreme range, exploded by their 4.5-second self-destruct timer, which translates to roughly 950 flight distance, as a method of long-distance approach denial for infantry and reconnaissance. The most noteworthy use of RPG against aircraft in Afghanistan occurred on 6 August 2011, when Taliban fighters shot down a U.S. CH-47 Chinook helicopter, killing all 38 personnel on board, including SEAL Team 6, from a range of 220 meters. An earlier anti-aircraft kill by the Taliban occurred during Operation Red Wings on 28 June 2005, when a Chinook helicopter was destroyed by unguided rocket-propelled grenades. In the period following the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the RPG became a favorite weapon of the insurgent forces fighting U.S. troops. Since most of the readily available RPG-7 rounds cannot penetrate Moan Abrams tank armor from almost any angle, it is primarily effective against soft-skinned or lightly armored vehicles and infantry. Even if the RPG hit does not completely disable the tank or kill the crew, it can still damage external equipment, lowering the tank's effectiveness or forcing the crew to abandon and destroy it. Newer RPG-7 rounds are more capable, and in August 2006, an RPG-29 round penetrated the frontal ERA of a Challenger 2 tank during an engagement in Al-Amara, Iraq, and wounded several crew members. RPG were a main tool used by the FMLN's guerrilla forces in the Salvadoran Civil War. For example, during the June 19, 1986 overrun of the San Miguel Army Base, FMLN sappers dressed only in black shorts, their faces blacked out with grease, sneaked through barbed wire at night, avoiding the searchlights. They made it to within firing range of the outer wall. Using RPG to initiate the attack, they blew through the wall and killed a number of Salvadorian soldiers. They eliminated the outermost sentries and searchlights with the rockets, then made it into the inner wall, which they also punched through. They were then able to create mayhem as their comrades attacked from the outside. During the first 1994-1996 and second Chechen Wars 1999-2009, Chechen rebels used RPG to attack Russian tanks from basements and high rooftops. This tactic was effective because tank main guns could not be depressed or raised far enough to return fire. In addition, armor on the very top and bottom of tanks is usually the weakest. Russian forces had to rely on artillery suppression, good crew gunners and infantry screens to prevent such attacks. Tank columns were eventually protected by attached self-propelled anti-aircraft guns ZSU-23-4 Shilka, 9K-22 Tunguska used in the ground role to suppress and destroy Chechen ambushes. Chechen fighters formed independent cells that worked together to destroy a specific Russian armored target. Each cell contained small arms and some form of RPG-7V or RPG-18, for example. The small arms were used to button the tank up and keep any infantry occupied, while the RPG gunner struck at the tank. While doing so, other teams would attempt to fire at the target in order to overwhelm the Russians' ability to effectively counter the attack. To further increase the chance of success, the teams took up positions at different elevations where possible. Firing from the third and higher floors allowed good shots at the weakest armor, the top. When the Russians began moving in tanks fitted with explosive reactive armor (ERA), the Chechens had to adapt their tactics because the RPG they had access to were unlikely to result in the destruction of the tank. Using RPG as improvised anti-aircraft batteries has proved successful in Somalia, Afghanistan, and Chechnya. Helicopters are typically ambushed as they land, take off, or hover. In Afghanistan, the Mujahideen often modified RPG for use against Soviet helicopters by adding a curved pipe to the rear of the launcher tube, which diverted the backblast, allowing the RPG to be fired upward at aircraft from a prone position. This made the operator less visible prior to firing and decreased the risk of injury from hot exhaust gases. The Mujahideen also utilized the 4.5-second timer on RPG rounds to make the weapon function as part of a flat battery, using multiple launchers to increase hit probabilities. At the time, Soviet helicopters countered the threat from RPG at landing zones by first clearing them with anti-personnel saturation fire. The Soviets also varied the number of accompanying helicopters, 2 or 3, in an effort to upset Afghan force estimations and preparation. In response, the Mujahideen prepared dug-in firing positions with top cover, and again, Soviet forces altered their tactics by using air-dropped thermobaric fuel air bombs on such landing zones. As the U.S. supplied Stinger surface-to-air missiles became available to them, the Afghans abandoned RPG attacks, as the smart missiles proved especially efficient in the destruction of unarmed Soviet transport helicopters, such as MiL-17. In Somalia, both of the UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters lost by U.S. forces during the Battle of Mogadishu in 1993 were downed by RPG-7s.